Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. This week we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech, and this is actually episode number 100, and it is titled Rainbow Random. And if you haven't seen this show before, what we're doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com, working with a budget of $100 or less, and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So this week, for our special 100th episode, we of course got to get a suggestion from one of our patrons, Eric Huey over on Patreon, and he suggested to us Jodah the Unifier. So Jodah the Unifier is white, blue, black, red, green for a 5/5 legendary creature human wizard. Legendary creatures you control get +X/+X, where X is the number of legendary creatures you control. Whenever you cast a legendary spell from your hand, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a legendary non-land card with lesser mana value. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, as I'm sure you're all aware, since we have Jodah as our random card and Jodah is a legendary creature, that does mean that he's going to be our commander. However, this is a bit of a unique deck, and I wanted to do something a little bit special because this was a suggestion from one of the patrons. It's our 100th episode, so I wanted to change up the theme a little bit. So instead of Jodah just by default being our commander, instead we are going to use 19 total commanders for this deck. And I know that sounds a little bit weird, but the way that this works is we are built around 5-color legends, which is perfect for Jodah. That's exactly what he wants. So if you wanted to build this deck and you wanted the best version of it, definitely put Jodah in the command zone because it is built around him. However, since we have 19 total commanders, and there are 20 total cards, but Othelm and Cecily partner with each other, making them technically only one commander in the command zone, the way this is going to work is at the start of every game, all of our cards are going to be shuffled into the deck together. We will not have a commander in the command zone. So instead, we shuffle up our deck and we start flipping cards from the top of our deck until we hit one of our many 5-color legends. We slide that commander into the command zone, and that is going to be our commander for the game. So there's no real way of knowing which of the commanders we're going to hit at any given time, and there are some that the deck is more suited for. Like I mentioned, if you hit Jodah, that is by far the best one. Some other very good ones, Jensen is good, Sisay is very good, the other Jodah, Garth One-Eye, very powerful commanders in their own right. And there are unfortunately some that really don't do too much, but are still relatively powerful on their own. Cody is great, but we run a ton of permanents. Atog, we don't have any Atogs. Niv Mizzet, we don't run a ton of just 2-color cards. We have a lot of 5-color cards. Horde of Notions and Reaper King, we don't have any real synergies for elementals or for scarecrows. They're kind of just in here for the colors, but it is a unique twist on the deck. So right here is an entire fifth of our deck. We want to make sure that we are building around these legendary creatures to make use of Jodah's abilities, and then maybe just have a random commander for the game. So with all of that explanation out of the way, let's take a look at some themes for the deck and the way that this deck is intending to run. So the very first theme that we got to talk about ties into what we just mentioned with all of the commanders, and that is going to be legendary creatures. So, for example, we have Arvad the Cursed, which is 2 white-black for a 3/3 legendary creature, Vampire Knight. He's got Death Touch, Lifelink, and gives other legendary creatures +2/+2. Since we're running a ton of legendary creatures, we're able to use things like Arvad to give our entire team +2/+2, maybe some other abilities, maybe they punch each other. There's just a ton of different things that we can do with this. So banking on having a ton of legendaries means we can run the cards that care about legendaries. Then that leads us to theme number 2, which is going to be 5-color, and multicolor in general matters. So that's where we get cards like Iridian Maelstrom, which is white, blue, black, red, green for a sorcery that says destroy each creature that isn't all colors. Yes, that will hit a fair amount of our creatures, but since we're running so many 5-color legends, there's a good chance that we're the only person on the board who actually gets to keep any creatures at all from this board wipe. And there's a ton of other cards that care about things that have multiple colors. There's cards that care about all 5 colors. So we can really benefit from this in ways that our opponents can't because we're focused so much on the 5-color and the legendary theme. Then Finally, our last theme is going to be gates. Since this deck is a 5-color deck and I really wanted to push to have as many 5-color cards as possible, that meant that we had some budget constraints when it came to the mana base, so I wanted to lean a little bit more into gates because that's a very cheap way to build an efficient 5-color mana base, and then I figured since we're running a bunch of gates, we may as well run cards like Guild Summit, which is 2 and a blue for an enchantment. When Guild Summit enters the battlefield, you may tap any number of untapped gates you control, draw a card for each gate tapped this way, and whenever a gate enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. So there are a lot of new gates that came out in Baldur's Gate. So we're no longer limited to just the 10 basic guilds gates. We now have a ton of other gates that we can run as well to make things work. There's gates like Gond Gate that makes all of our gates come in untapped. We've got Heap Gate that can make treasures. We've got Baldur's Gate, which is essentially like a Nykthos for gates. So our mana base, while it's still a little bit clunky, I'm not going to lie, it's very difficult to cast a ton of 5-mana spells. It is relevant to note that it's a lot less clunky than if we were running a bunch of basics. So that way, with all of our guild gates and all of our other gates, we can make sure we have the mana we need, and then may as well play some synergies to go along with it. So those are our themes for this week, and the next thing we're going to have to do is take a look at some key cards, some cards that synergize very well with what the deck is trying to do and really help push us toward a win. So the first of our key cards is going to be Knight of New Alara, which is a card that you've probably seen played on this channel multiple times. I am a big fan of this card. I try to play it as much as I can. It is 2 green-white for a 2/2 human knight that says each other multicolored creature you control gets +1/+1 for each of its colors. Since we're running so many 5-color commanders, this can essentially give most of our team +5/+5. And even if we're talking about a little 1/1 creature, now it's a 6/6, it's presenting much more of a threat than it would have before. And this also hits a lot of our 2-color and 3-color creatures, giving them just +2/+2, +3/+3. It doesn't hit our monocolored creatures, and we do have some monocolored creatures, especially, unfortunately, since there are a lot of 5-color commanders who are technically only 1 color. They'll be white to cast, but have a 5-color activated ability, which makes them a 5-color commander, but they still only count as a white creature, so they kind of miss out on a couple of those, but it's still a very nice include to pump up our entire team. Our next key card is going to be Radadrobic of Urborg, and Radadrobic of Urborg plays really nicely with our legendary sub-theme because it is 2 white-black for a 3/3 legendary creature zombie wizard, vigilance, ward 2. Other zombies you control have vigilance, and whenever another legendary creature you control dies, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's not legendary, and it's a 2/2 black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. So now we've got great board wipe protection, because if anyone wipes our board while we have all of our legends, we can just continue to make the legends as we get token copies of them. And the really nice thing about Radadrobic is it doesn't exile the creature that it makes a copy of. So our creatures can die, we make tokens, and then if we have ways to bring them back from the graveyard, which, spoiler, we do, then we can get them back and kind of continue the process because now the tokens aren't legendary. They're not going to legend rule themselves when they replace each other. So Radadrobic is a huge engine in this deck and really gets us a ton of value in ways that you might not expect. And it's also just tough for our opponents to deal with. Ward 2, while not being unnecessarily strong, is usually enough to stop the occasional removal spell, because now instead of spending 1 mana for a Swords to Plowshares, someone has to spend 3. And that's a lot more mana to hold up at any given time, meaning Radadrobic can kind of just do his thing unless someone is very determined to take him out of the game. And then, finally, that leads us to our last key card, which is Relic of Legends. We have, as I've mentioned, a bunch of different legends, so why not turn all of our legends into mana dorks as well? So Relic of Legends, 3 mana for an artifact, taps to add a mana of any color, and also lets us tap an untapped legendary creature we control to make a mana of any color. It's very important that it doesn't give the creature this ability. This is the ability of the relic itself, so this can actually tap our creatures that are still summoning sick. So it gives us ways to kind of get around the fact that we're probably playing one big bomb every single turn. Now we can play out one big creature, use some of our other creatures to play another creature, maybe even use that creature to play something else. And it's nice that as long as we have untapped creatures, we can technically be holding up answers to anything else that's going on. So if we need to hold up a counter spell or a removal spell, all we have to do is make sure our creatures are untapped, which, if we have Ratadrobic and Vigilance, is not that hard to do. So Relic of Legends is really an all-star in this deck, and looking at the 3 powerful cards here, it's impressive that Relic of Legends is so much more expensive than the other 2, but I think it's definitely worth that price tag and earns its spot here as a key card. So that is the basics of the deck, but of course we got to talk about some ways that some cards interact with each other. We got to go over some cool interactions. So the first cool interaction that we're going to mention is going to be between Mana Cannons and Falaji Wayfarer. So the uniqueness of these two is that they're both incredibly powerful on their own, and they kind of do things with other cards in our deck, but they're actually very strong together as well. So Mana Cannons is 2 and a red for an enchantment. Whenever you cast a multicolored spell, Mana Cannons deals X damage to any target, where X is the number of colors that spell is. So if we cast something that is 2 colors, like Arvad, we get to do 2 damage to any target. On the other hand, we have Falaji Wayfarer, which is 2 and a green, so just 1 color, so you might not think it triggers on Mana Cannons, but it's a 2/4 human scout that is all colors. However, this ability doesn't affect its color identity, so it could go in a mono green commander deck if you wanted. And it gives our multicolored spells Convoke. So all we've got to do is have Mana Cannons on board. We cast Falaji Wayfarer. It technically counts as all 5 colors, meaning we can do 5 damage to any target. And then all of our multicolored spells from there on out have Convoke, so we can tap our creatures to cast more multicolored spells, triggering Mana Cannons more often, and just kind of spiraling out of control, because we can do that damage to any target. We can shoot down creatures so they can't block us or attack us. We can shoot down planeswalkers. We can do damage to our opponents. Mana Cannons is incredibly powerful in this deck. And when we have a bunch of 5-color spells like Falaji Wayfarer, plus the ramp ability of giving everything Convoke, that can really get out of hand very, very quickly. So that is cool interaction number 1. And cool interaction number 2 is going to look a little bit different. This one is going to be between Search for Glory and Black Blade Reforged. Now, Search for Glory is a card that should probably see a lot more play in decks that want it, but it's incredibly powerful in this deck because it is 2 and a white for a snow sorcery. Search your library for a snow permanent card, a legendary card, or a saga card. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. You gain 1 life for each snow spent to cast this spell. Notably, we do not run snow lands. If you're looking for an easy upgrade, that would be something you could do. This is the only snow card in the deck, so I didn't feel it was necessary because snow lands tend to run a little bit more expensive than normal basics, but that is something you can do. But what we're going to use Search for Glory for is literally anything. Because it searches for a legendary card and we are a Legendary Matters deck, we have a ton of things that this can search out. And so most of the time we're going to be getting creatures. We might get removal spells because there are legendary removal spells. But the one card that I like getting the most with this is actually Black Blade Reforged. Because Black Blade Reforged is 2 mana for a legendary artifact equipment. We can get it with Search for Glory. And it gives equipped creature +1/+1 for each land we control. It equips a legendary creature for 3 and equips a non-legendary creature for 7. So basically all we've got to do is spend 3 mana to cast Search for Glory, 2 to cast Black Blade, 3 to equip, and we can have a massive creature on board very, very quickly. And since we've seen a ton of creatures like Ratadrobic, for example, that has Vigilance, or Arvad that has Death Touch, Black Blade Reforged can make some absolutely monstrous creatures that are very difficult for our opponents to deal with. That is at least my suggestion. I'm a big fan of both of these cards, Search for Glory and Black Blade. I think they should both see more play than they already do, and I know Black Blade sees a ton of play, so if you haven't tried these cards out, definitely do try them out. They're very, very good. But that brings us to the end of our cool interactions, and so now we get to the part of the deck tech that I'm sure most people are interested in, and that is going to be the price of the deck. So this week, out of our $100 budget for our 100th episode, we came pretty darn close, $91.19, with the most expensive card in the entire deck being Reiki the History of Kamigawa at a whopping $10.83. And Reiki is 2 and a green for a 1/2 legendary creature, Human Shaman. Whenever you play a legendary spell, draw a card. I'm sure it goes without saying that is an incredibly powerful ability in this deck because we're going to be playing a ton of legendary spells. Then we can kind of refill our hands, keep going. But Reiki is almost $11, so if you wanted to cut the price of the deck down closer to about $80, this would be the card to cut. However, if you do want to keep it in, it's a very good source of card draw and worth the slot, but I do understand needing to cut it. On the other hand, though, it is also important to take a look at some cards that are outside of our budget range that I would include in this deck if we could. So the out-of-budget upgrades for this week, the main suggestion is going to be Esika, God of the Tree. Because Esika, God of the Tree is 1 green for a 1/4 Vigilance, tap to add 1 mana of any color, and other legendary creatures you control have Vigilance and tap, add 1 mana of any color. Now, admittedly, Esika, very good, but what we really want Esika in this deck for is the backside, which is the Prismatic Bridge. The Prismatic Bridge would be white, blue, black, red, green for a legendary enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature or planeswalker card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom in a random order. A couple of notes about Esika and the Prismatic Bridge. 1, she is a 5-color legendary creature, which means that if we put her in the deck, we then have another hit for when we're flipping commanders off the top of our deck. But if we can cast the Prismatic Bridge, we have a bunch of creatures in our deck that are 5+ mana and very difficult to cast because of all the colors that they need. And the Prismatic Bridge really just spins us into a free one every single turn. We don't really have any planeswalkers to hit, but just hitting creatures every turn is big enough. We don't have a lot of small creatures, and even the ones that we do are very useful for our game plan, so no matter what we hit, it's very relevant for our deck. And then the card that I would recommend swapping this out for would actually be Jaya's Immolating Inferno, which is X red for a legendary sorcery, which means we can only cast it if we control a legendary creature or planeswalker. We most likely will, but that is a drawback to keep in mind. And Jaya's Immolating Inferno deals X damage to each of up to 3 targets. Normally, this would be a finisher in a deck that can generate a ton of mana, but I'm not going to lie, our main game plan isn't to generate a ton of mana, so most often Jaya's Immolating Inferno isn't going to be doing enough damage to actually knock out the table. It's only going to be doing enough damage to kind of annoy the table, and that's not what we want to be doing because there's a good chance that we're already drawing a little bit of ire with all of our gate synergies. I know that sounds weird because gates are not super strong, but they do require a lot of attention from the table, and then also from our legendaries as well. They have a lot of synergies and are very powerful among themselves, so we don't really want to just hit each opponent for 10 and then all of a sudden everyone's looking at us and trying to remove all of our stuff. So not necessarily the best card. It's still very good, but if you can swap it out for the Prismatic Bridge, that would be my suggestion. So that brings us to the end of our actual deck tech, and the very last thing we've got to do before we get into the game for this week is talk a little bit about some ways that you can help support the channel. So since this is our 100th episode, I do want to very quickly say thank you to everyone who has been watching. I really appreciate all of the support. I love reading all the comments and interacting with people on YouTube and Twitter and Reddit, email, all of that stuff. Y'all are great. I really appreciate it. But if you are looking to reach out to us or have questions, you can always find me on Twitter at 13POYNZ, Reddit u/POYNZ13, and then by email, dungeonlearnersguide@gmail.com. I will do my best to respond on all of those platforms, so please do reach out if you have any questions or want to talk. And then, if you're looking to support the content a little bit more directly, you can head on over to our TCG Player affiliate link. And over there, once you purchase any cards after clicking on that link, we get a little bit of a kickback as a thank you for sending you their way. And then finally, The most direct way to support us is at Patreon, patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide. Over there, you get access to things like the deck lists a week early. You get access to a Discord channel where we talk about brewing up the decks and also play some of the games for the channel. So if you're interested in playing the games, that is a great way to do it. You also get access to the unedited gameplay videos, so you can hear the players talking and interacting with each other rather than just my own commentary. And you get access to a random card sent to you every single month as a thank you for all of your support. And I know I'm still going, but one last thing. The most important thing, at least in my own opinion, is that you also get the guarantee that any suggestions you make for cards you want to see turned into decks for the channel will be made in the future. I can't guarantee that for anyone but our patrons. I will certainly try to get to any requests people have, so if you do have requests, please leave them in the comments and let me know. But I can't guarantee it unless you are one of our patrons. So with all of that being said, I do want to shout out our 5 current patrons as a massive thank you. We do have William Swiftfoot, we've got Doodle, Calvin Schmidt, Eric Hui, and Jeff Winger. So to the 5 of you, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I hope to continue this support past episode 100. But with all of that out of the way, let's take a look at our opponents for the game that we're going to play. And it is relevant to note, since this is episode 100 and we could have up to 20 different commanders, I thought it only made sense to play a couple of games for this. So we have 2 games that we're going to play for this deck. The first one, we're going to be joined by Bilal playing Alayla, Artful Provocateur, Jason playing the Swarm Lord, and Greasefang Okiba Boss being played by Shawn. So these commanders are all pretty terrifying just looking at them. I think if I have to pick one, Bilal's Alayla deck is probably the scariest to me. He actually built it as a completely creatureless deck, so Alayla is the only creature in the entire deck, but he's got it filled to the brim with artifacts and enchantments, so he can make a ton of fairies, kind of control the game. And my biggest concern with Alayla is that she makes flying fairies, and we don't have a great defense against flying creatures, other than just hopefully trying to be faster and do a lot more damage. So that is why I think Alayla is my biggest concern. Next up, we have Jason and his Swarm Lord deck. This is, at this point, a completely unmodified precon deck, so everything in here was in the 40k constructed deck. Everything is from the Tyrannid deck. He wants to make a ton of creatures and put a bunch of +1/+1 counters on them. So I am also worried about this because I've played against an unmodified Tyrannid deck before, and it is very powerful, and I wouldn't be surprised if his creatures eventually outpace our own, but hopefully we'll be able to get in underneath the big swarm. And then finally, Shawn's Greasefang deck. He has played this deck on the channel before, so if you're interested, you can definitely go check that out. But I am a huge fan of Greasefang. I'm a huge fan of vehicles in general. One of my favorite personal commander decks is a Dapala commander deck where I play a ton of vehicles. And then my go-to Pioneer deck is Greasefang. So there's a lot of Greasefang that shows up in the list that I play, a lot of vehicles that show up. So I am super excited to play against Shawn's Greasefang deck. It's always a ton of fun. I love seeing it go and do its thing. But these are going to be our opponents for game number 1. Hopefully you all enjoy the game as much as I do. Please do like the video, subscribe to the channel if this is something that you're interested in, and I will talk to you all once the game is done. Before the game starts, I reveal cards from my deck until I hit a 5-color legendary creature, making it the commander for the game.
Deck with a...
Oh, see? Boom, right off the top. Tazri.
Okay.
Then, Bilal goes first, Jason goes second, I go third, and Shawn goes last. Bilal plays an island and casts Soul Ring, casts Arcane Signet, then also casts Sensei's Divining Top. Jason plays a Rugged Highlands, gaining a life. I play Cliffgate, naming green, so it taps for green or red. Shawn plays an Uncharted Haven, naming black. Bilal plays a Concealed Courtyard and casts his commander Alayla, Artful Provocateur, giving his other flying creatures +1/+0, and also making a 1/1 fairy token whenever he casts an artifact or enchantment. Jason plays a Terramorphic Expanse, sacrificing it to search his library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped. I play a Gateway Plaza, paying 1 when it enters so it's not sacrificed. Shawn plays a Plains and casts an Orzhov Signet. In Bilal's upkeep, he activates the top, looking at the top 3 cards of his library and putting them back in any order. Then he plays a Plains and attacks Shawn for 2 with a Layla, gaining 2 life thanks to lifelink. Jason plays a command tower and casts Acolyte Hybrid, letting him destroy an artifact when it attacks, but letting the artifact's controller draw a card. I play an island and cast Crackling Perimeter, letting me tap an untapped gate I control to do 1 damage to each opponent. Shawn casts Aerial Surveyor, which allows him to search his library for a plains and put it into play whenever it attacks a player with more lands than him. Then at the end of turn, Bilal activates the top again, rearranging the top 3 cards of his library. He then activates the top again, this time drawing a card and putting the top on top of his library. Then on his turn, he plays an Isolated Chapel and casts Authority of the Consuls, making a fairy token, making each creature his opponent's control enter tapped while he gains a life when they enter. He also recasts the Divining Top, making another fairy, then moves to combat, attacking Shawn for 2 with a Layla, gaining 2 life. Jason plays a mountain and attacks Bilal for 2, destroying his Soul Ring on attacks and letting Bilal draw a card. Then Bilal blocks with a fairy, killing both creatures. In response to the card draw though, Bilal activates the Divining Top, rearranging the top 3 cards of his library, then activates it again, drawing a card and putting the Divining Top on top of his library. In Jason's second main phase, he casts Tyrant Guard for X equals 1, putting a +1/+1 counter on it and letting him sacrifice the guard to give his creatures with counters hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. Then at the end of turn, I tap my Gateway Plaza, doing 1 damage to each opponent. On my turn, I play a Swamp and cast Guild Summit, letting me tap any number of gates when it enters to draw that many cards. In this case, I tap 1 to draw 1, and then it also allows me to draw a card whenever I play a gate. Shawn casts Lochiel Clockwork Scholar, preventing all combat damage that would be dealt to artifact creatures he controls, and letting him draw a card once per turn whenever an artifact creature enters under his control. Bilal plays a Prairie Stream, casts Helm of Possession, making a fairy token, and attacks Jason for 2 with a Layla, gaining 2 life. Jason plays a Forest, and then attacks me for 4, and in his second main phase, he casts Screamer Killer, letting him do 5 damage to any target whenever he casts a creature with mana value 5 or greater. I play a Plains and cast Simic Signet, followed up by casting Cecily Haunted Mage, making my maximum hand size 11 and letting me draw a card and lose a life when she attacks, then cast an instant or sorcery for free from my hand if I have 11 or more cards in hand. Shawn uses Lochiel to crew the Surveyor, attacking Bilal for 3 and searching his library for a Plains, putting it into play tapped. Then, before damage, Bilal activates the Helm of Possession, sacrificing a fairy and tapping it to gain control of the Surveyor for as long as the helm remains tapped, preventing him from taking the damage. In Shawn's second main phase, he casts Mech Titan Core. When Bilal untaps for his turn, he chooses to leave the Helm of Possession tapped. He then plays a Glacial Fortress and recasts the Divining Top, making a fairy token and immediately activating it to rearrange the top 3 cards of his library. He then activates it again, drawing a card and putting the top on top of his library. He casts Grasp of Fate, making another fairy token and exiling Screamer Killer, Cecily, and Lochiel until it leaves play. After that, he uses a fairy to crew the Aerial Surveyor and then attacks Shawn for 2 with a Layla and me for 3. Before damage though, Shawn casts Swords to Plowshares, exiling a Layla and gaining Bilal 2 life. On Jason's turn, he casts Clamavus, giving all his creatures +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on them. This allows him to move to combat and attack Bilal for 5. I play a Thran Portal, naming green so it taps for green mana, and I also draw a card when it enters since it's a gate. Then I cast Radadrobic of Urborg, letting me make a non-legendary token copy of any other legendary creature that dies under my control, except it's a 2/2 zombie in addition to its other types. Shawn plays a Plains and casts Solemn Simulacrum, searching his library for a basic land and putting it into play tapped. When Bilal untaps, he untaps the Helm of Possession, giving Shawn the Surveyor back. He then recasts the Divining Top and immediately activates it to rearrange the top 3 cards of his library, and then activates it again to draw a card and put the top on top of his library, finally playing an island and passing. Jason casts Overgrowth on a forest, letting it tap for an additional 2 green mana, then attacks me for 5 and Shawn for 3. At the end of his turn, I tap 2 gates to do 2 damage to each opponent. On my turn, I play an Azorius Guildgate, drawing a card, then cast Kamal's Druidic Vow for X equals 5, looking at the top 5 cards of my library and putting all lands and legendary permanents with mana value 5 or less into play. Unfortunately, this only ends up putting a swamp into play. Shawn casts an Unmarked Grave, searching his library for a non-legendary card and putting it into his graveyard. This has him getting Thundersteel Colossus, and he then casts his commander Greasefang Okiba Boss. Then when he moves to combat, Greasefang triggers and returns Thundersteel Colossus from his graveyard to play, giving it haste. This allows him to crew it with Solemn Simulacrum and attack Bilal for 7. Before damage though, Bilal activates Helm of Possession, sacrificing a fairy to gain control of the Colossus, removing it from combat. However, thanks to Greasefang's ability, it still returns to Shawn's hand at the end of turn. On Bilal's turn, he recasts the Divining Top, activating it to rearrange the top 3 cards of his library, then he once again activates the top to draw a card and put the top on top of his library. After that, he casts Ghostly Prison, making each opponent pay 2 mana to attack him. Jason casts his commander, the Swarmlord, which enters with 2 +1/+1 counters, and also lets him draw a card when a creature he controls with counters on it dies. I play a mountain and cast Blackblade Reforged, equipping it to Rada Drabik, giving him +10/+10 since I control 10 lands. Shawn casts Sign in Blood, drawing 2 cards and losing 2 life. Then he crews the Aerial Surveyor with the Solemn Simulacrum and pays 2 mana to attack Bilal, searching his library for a Plains, putting it into play tapped. However, before damage, Bilal activates Helm of Possession, sacrificing a fairy to once again take control of the Surveyor, preventing the damage. Bilal recasts his commander Alayla, and then uses Alayla to crew the Aerial Surveyor and attacks me for 3, searching his library for a Plains and putting it into play tapped. Jason moves straight to combat on his turn and pays 2 to attack Bilal for 9 with the Swarmlord, but he blocks with a fairy, killing the token. Then in his second main phase, he casts Gargoyle Flock, making a 1/1 Tyrannid Gargoyle token in his end step if a creature entered the battlefield under his control this turn. This triggers itself this turn, so he makes a token. Still at the end of turn, I tap 3 gates to do 3 damage to each opponent. On my turn, I play a Command Tower and pay 2 to attack Bilal with Rada Drabik, hitting him for 13 total damage. Then in my second main phase, I cast Mana Cannons, which does damage equal to the colors of any multicolored spell I cast to any target. This allows me to cast Yawgmoth's Vile Offering, doing 1 damage to Jason's Gargoyle token, killing it, destroying Alayla, and returning Falaji Wayfarer from my graveyard to the battlefield, giving all my multicolored spells Convoke. Shawn casts King Makar the Gold Curse, which exiles a creature and makes a gold token when he untaps. At the end of turn, Bilal activates the Divining Top, rearranging the top 3 cards of his library, and then activates it again to draw a card and put the top back on top of his library. Then on Bilal's turn, he casts Cleansing Nova, destroying all creatures and letting Jason draw 2 cards, while Shawn draws 1. After that, he casts Karn the Great Creator, preventing his opponents from activating abilities of artifacts. He activates Karn's +1 ability to turn the Aerial Surveyor into a 3/3 creature since its mana value is 3, and this lets him attack me for 3 and search his library for a Plains, putting it into play tapped. Jason plays an Evolving Wilds and casts Termagant Swarm for X equals 6, so it comes in with 6 +1/+1 counters, draws a card, and makes 6 1/1 Tyrannid tokens when it dies. He then sacrifices his Evolving Wilds, searching his library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped. At the end of turn, I tap a gate to do 1 damage to each opponent. On my turn, I cast Circuitous Route, searching my library for 2 gates, putting them into play tapped and drawing 2 cards. Then I cast District Guide, searching my library for another gate and putting it into my hand. This lets me get and play Heap Gate, drawing another card. Once that's resolved, I cast my commander, Tazri Beacon of Unity, doing another damage to Karn. On Shawn's turn, he cast Parhelion 2. Bilal recasts the Divining Top, activating it to rearrange the top 3 cards of his library, and then activates Karn's +1 ability to turn the Surveyor into a creature, using it to attack me for 3, searching his library for a plains, and putting it into play tapped. Jason plays a Forest and casts Old One-Eye, making a 5/5 Tyrannid token when it enters play, and giving all his other creatures trample. He then attacks me for 6, and in his second main phase casts Pure Strain Gene Stealer, which enters with 2 +1/+1 counters and allows him to remove a counter when it attacks, to search his library for a basic land and put it into play tapped. On my turn, I cast Reiki, the History of Kamigawa, letting me draw a card whenever I cast a legendary spell. I then activate Tazri, looking at the top 6 cards of my library and revealing up to 2 allies, wizards, clerics, rogues, or warriors, putting them into my hand. Unfortunately though, I don't find any. Shawn recasts his commander Greasefang, and at the end of turn, Bilal activates the Divining Top, rearranging the top 3 cards of his library. On Bilal's turn, he casts Search for Azcanta, and then activates Karn's +1 ability to turn the Surveyor into a creature, allowing him to attack me for 3 and search his library for a plains, putting it into play tapped. Second main phase, he plays an Idyllic Grange, putting a +1/+1 counter on the Aerial Surveyor. Jason plays an island and casts Icon of Ancestry, giving his Tyrannids +1/+1. He then attacks Bilal for 14 damage, paying 4 for Ghostly Prison. Then at the end of turn, I tap 6 gates to do 6 damage to each opponent. On my turn, I play an Orzhov Guildgate, drawing a card, and activate Tazri again, this time revealing Jodah Archmage Eternal, putting it into my hand. I then cast Jodah, drawing a card, and doing 3 damage to Karn, and this now allows me to pay 1 mana of any color for spells I cast rather than their normal casting costs. I move to combat, attacking Karn for 2, killing the Planeswalker. Then in my second main phase, I can finally equip Blackblade to Tazri, giving her +15/+15. On Shawn's turn, with Karn gone, he can finally use Greasefang to crew Parhelion, attacking Bilal for 5, creating 2 4/4 Angel tokens that are attacking me, knocking me out of the game. But before I'm fully gone, I go out with a bang, tapping 5 gates to do 5 damage to each opponent. Then in Shawn's second main phase, he casts Aradara Express, followed up by casting Bone Shards, sacrificing an angel to destroy Jason's Old One-Eye. In Bilal's upkeep, he surveils 1 with Search for Azcanta, putting a swamp into his graveyard, then activates the Divining Top to rearrange the top 3 cards of his library, recasts his commander Alayla, casts Treasure Map, making a fairy, then at the end of turn, Jason activates the Icon of Ancestry, looking at the top 3 cards of his library and putting a Tyrannid from among them into his hand, in this case, Gearson Starn Kellermorph. In Jason's first main phase, he discards 2 cards to return Old One-Eye to his hand, and then he recasts it, making another 5/5 Tyrannid token. He attacks Shawn for 13 total damage before removing a counter from the Gene Stealer to search his library for a basic land and put it into play tapped. Before damage, Shawn casts Dispatch, exiling Termagant Swarm, but still taking 9 damage. On Shawn's turn, he crews Parhelion and the Aradara with Greasefang and an Angel to attack Jason for exactly 21 damage, knocking him out of the game. Then in his second main phase, he casts Costly Plunder, sacrificing an Angel to draw 2 cards. He also casts Teleportation Circle, letting him exile a creature he controls at the end of turn and return it to the battlefield. Finally, he overloads Dam, destroying all creatures. Unfortunately for Shawn, this still leaves him open to Bilal just attacking him with the Aerial Surveyor after he's recast Alayla and crewed it, winning Bilal the game. Alright, so game number 1 was pretty sweet. I don't want to quite get into it just yet, so let's talk about game number 2, and then we'll talk about both games once we get to the wrap-up. So our second game, we're going to be joined by Sorceress, who is playing Omnath, Locus of Mana, Jason from Strata Games playing Raph, Weatherlight Stalwart, and then Mikayla playing Emil the Blessed. So starting off with Sorceress and her Omnath deck, this is another deck that has been seen on the channel before. She actually has 85 forests in the deck, so her goal is just to get Omnath on board, protect him, and then just do a ton of damage by playing a ton of forests, making him massive, and just slowly grinding out value that way. So like I said, I've seen this deck before. It is definitely a sight to behold, and it is surprisingly powerful. You don't expect a deck with 85 lands to be a terror at the table, but every single time I've played against it, it has been quite literally a terror at the table, so I'm very excited for that. Next up, we have Jason's Wrath deck. Now, I've never played against this version of Wrath. I've played against the original, and I had the original Wrath deck for quite a while. But this version of the deck focuses more on tokens and casting instants and sorceries and untapping shenanigans. So he wants to have as many tokens as possible so he can just tap them, draw cards, cast instants and sorceries, make more tokens, and just kind of continue the value train. So I am very excited for this deck. This sounds like something that is way up my alley, so I look forward to seeing what it can do. And then finally, the deck that I'm probably the most concerned about is Mikayla's Emil deck. I'm well aware of how powerful Emil is because almost every single time I see it, it's doing some kind of busted combo. Now, I don't think Mikayla is doing the busted combos. She was very open about the fact that this is a unicorn-themed deck, so most of the creatures are going to be unicorns rather than just blinking style strategies. So I do think that lowers the power level a little bit, but I do think Emil is strong enough to still kind of warrant a bit of concern. But either way, I am very excited for this game. I hope you all are as well, and I will talk to you all once it's done. Before the game starts, I reveal cards from my deck until I hit a 5-color legendary creature, making it the commander.
It is Cody.
Oh!
Then at the start of the game, Sorceress goes first, followed by Jason, Mikayla, and myself. On Sorceress' first turn, she plays a forest. Jason plays a tapped Hallowed Fountain. Mikayla plays a command tower. I play an Evolving Wilds, sacrificing it to search my library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped. Sorceress plays a forest. Jason plays a Castle Vantress and casts his commander, Wrath Weatherlight Stalwart, letting him tap 2 untapped creatures to draw a card whenever he casts an instant or sorcery, and also allows him to pay 5 mana to give his creatures +1/+1 in Vigilance until the end of turn. Mikayla cycles a Tranquil Thicket, and then plays an Oran Reef the Fastwood. I play a Manor Gate naming Black, so it taps for both green and black. Sorceress plays a forest and casts her commander, Omnath Locus of Mana, which gets +1/+1 for each green mana in her mana pool, and allowing green mana to stay in her mana pool between phases. Jason plays a Plains and casts Halo Fountain, and then attacks me for 1 with Wrath. Mikayla plays a Canopy Vista tapped, and then casts Selesnya Signet. I play a Plains and cast Reiki the History of Kamigawa, drawing a card whenever I cast a legendary spell. Sorceress plays a forest and casts Swiftfoot Boots, immediately equipping the boots to Omnath, giving it haste and hexproof. Sorceress then floats 1 green mana, making Omnath into a 2/2. Jason plays a Myriad Landscape and attacks Mikayla for 1 with Wrath. Mikayla casts Prized Unicorn, which has to be blocked by all creatures able to block whenever it attacks. I play a Thran Portal, having it come in as a mountain that is also a gate, and then cast Search for Glory, searching my library for a legendary, putting them into my hand, in this case choosing Kethis the Hidden Hand. Sorceress plays a forest and floats 5 green mana, making Omnath a 7/7. She then attacks Jason for 7 with Omnath, but before blocks, Jason activates Halo Fountain to untap Wrath and make a 1/1 citizen token with the Halo Fountain, which he uses to block, taking no damage. On Jason's turn, he casts Felidar Retreat, which lets him make a 2/2 cat token or put a +1/+1 counter on all of his creatures whenever a land enters the battlefield under his control. Then he plays an island, making a cat token, and attacks Sorceress for 1 with Wrath. Mikayla casts Mirror Entity, letting her pay X mana to give her creatures base power and toughness XX until the end of turn. I play a Baldur's Gate, and then cast Kethis the Hidden Hand, drawing a card and making all my legendaries cost 1 less to cast. Sorceress plays a forest and floats 6 green mana, making Omnath a 13/13, then casts Cultivator Colossus, which has power and toughness equal to the number of lands she controls, letting her put a land into play. Then if she does put a land into play, she draws a card and repeats the process, putting a total of 10 lands into play. On Jason's turn, he simply passes. Mikayla plays a Felidar Retreat, plays a forest, making a cat, then moves to combat, attacking Sorceress with the prized unicorn, and, since it has to be blocked, Sorceress blocks with both of her creatures, killing the unicorn. I play a mountain, and then cast Thalia's Lancers, searching my library for a legendary, putting it into my hand. This lets me get Child of Alara. Sorceress plays a forest, and casts Lost in the Woods, letting her reveal the top card of her library whenever she's attacked. Then, if the revealed card is a forest, the combat damage is prevented. After that, she floats 13 mana, making Omnath a 19/19, and attacks Jason for 18 with the Colossus and me for 19 with Omnath. Before blocks, Jason sacrifices Myriad Landscape to search his library for 2 basic lands, putting them into play tapped, making 2 more cat tokens. This lets him block with his 3 cats and cast Emerge Unscathed on one of them, giving it protection from green and triggering Wrath, letting him tap the other 2 cats to draw a card. After that, he uses Halo Fountain to untap a cat to make a citizen, then 2 of Jason's cats die, while he only takes 12 damage, and I block with my Lancers, killing them but taking no damage. In Jason's upkeep, Emerge Unscathed rebounds, giving Wrath protection from green, letting him tap Wrath and a citizen to draw a card. He then plays a Plains, makes another cat token, and casts Prava of the Steel Legion, giving his tokens +1/+4 on his turn. Mikayla casts Capuchin Unicorn, which can be sacrificed to destroy an artifact or enchantment, and also casts Celestial Unicorn, which gets a +1/+1 counter whenever she gains life. I cast Circuitous Route, searching my library for 2 gates, putting them into play tapped, specifically Gond Gate and Golgari Guildgate. Sorceress plays a forest and floats 19 mana, making Omnath a 38/38. She attacks Mikayla with both her creatures for 57 total damage, but Mikayla blocks Omnath with her cat token, only taking 19 damage. Notably, this should have killed the token, but we forget to remove it from the board. At the end of turn, Jason activates Halo Fountain, untapping Wrath and making a citizen token. Then on his turn, he plays a Scavenger Grounds, making a cat, and casts Talrand Sky Summoner, making a 2/2 Drake token whenever he casts an instant or sorcery. After that, he casts Shared Discovery, tapping 4 untapped creatures to draw 3 cards. This also makes him a Drake with Talrand, while he taps 2 additional creatures, drawing a card with Wrath. On Mikayla's turn, she casts Mace of the Valiant, which gets a charge counter whenever a creature enters under her control. Then she activates the Capuchin Unicorn, sacrificing it to destroy the Swiftfoot Boots. On my turn, I cast Child of Alara, which destroys all non-land permanents when it's destroyed. This also draws me a card. Then I cast Othelm Sigardian Outcast, drawing another card and allowing me to activate him to return a creature from my graveyard to play if it was put there from the battlefield this turn. I then play a Gateway Plaza, using it to pay 1 so I don't sacrifice it, since it comes into play untapped with Gond Gate. Sorceress plays a forest and floats 20 mana, making Omnath a 58/58, then attacks Jason with both her creatures for 78 total damage. Before damage, Jason casts Prismatic Strands, preventing all damage that would be dealt by green creatures this turn. This also makes him a Drake token and allows him to tap 2 creatures to draw a card. Then on Jason's turn, he plays a Survivor's Encampment, putting a +1/+1 counter on each creature he controls, and activates Wrath, giving his entire team +1/+1 in Vigilance until the end of turn. After that, he casts Generous Gift, destroying Lost in the Woods, and giving Sorceress a 3/3 elephant token. He then attacks Sorceress with his entire board, and although she blocks with her new elephant, she still takes 38 damage, going to only 1 life. In Jason's second main phase, he casts Gaze of Justice, tapping 3 white creatures to exile Child of Alara, preventing the board wipe from happening, and tapping 2 creatures to draw a card. Mikayla casts Return of the Wild Speaker, giving her creatures +3/+3 until the end of turn. She then attacks Jason for 11 and Sorceress for 1, knocking her out of the game. Jason, though, blocks with 2 cat tokens and a Drake, killing one of his cats, his Drake, and Mikayla's Unicorn, taking no damage. On my turn, I cast Rien, Angel of Rebirth, drawing me a card, giving my multicolored creatures +1/+0, and letting me return any of my multicolored creatures to my hand at the end of turn when they die. I also cast Hero's Podium, drawing me a card and giving all my legendary creatures +1/+1 for each other legendary creature I control. I then attack Jason with my entire board for 17 damage. Before damage though, Jason flashes back Prismatic Strands, preventing all damage green sources would do this turn. This also makes him a Drake, and he taps 2 creatures to draw a card with Wrath. Second main phase though, I cast Gates Ablaze, doing 6 damage to each creature since I control 6 gates, completely wiping the board, but also triggering Rien, putting Othelm and Kethis back to my hand at the end of turn. Finally, I play a Selesnya Guildgate, and then pass. Jason plays a Sea of Clouds, making a cat token, then casts Poppet Stitcher, making a 2/2 zombie with Decayed whenever he casts an instant or sorcery spell, which he does immediately, casting Increasing Devotion, making 5 1/1 human tokens and a zombie token. Mikayla casts Lathiel the Bounteous Dawn, letting her distribute X +1/+1 counters among other creatures she controls in each end step, where X is the amount of life she gained that turn. I cast Falaji Wayfarer, giving my multicolored spells Convoke, and also cast Fabro Elder, which has power and toughness equal to the number of colors among permanents I control, and can also tap for those same colors. I then recast Kethis, again making my legendary spells cost 1 less, and finally cast Horde of Notions, but unfortunately Jason counters it with a counterspell. Finally, I play a Terramorphic Expanse, sacrificing it to search my library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped. In Jason's upkeep, Poppet Stitcher transforms into Poppet Factory since he controls 3 or more tokens, making all his tokens into 3/3s with no abilities. He then plays a Path of Ancestry, putting a +1/+1 counter on each of his creatures and giving them Vigilance. After that, he casts an Intrepid Adversary, paying an extra 6 mana when it enters to put 3 Valor counters on it, giving all his creatures an additional +3/+3. He then moves to combat, attacking Mikayla for 21 and me for 35. We both block one of the tokens, killing Kethis and Lathiel, then Mikayla takes 14, gaining 2 life from Lathiel, and I take 28. On Mikayla's turn, she plays a forest, making a cat token, and casts Jiangyangu Wildcrafter, activating his -1 ability to put a +1/+1 counter on my Fabro Elder. She also casts Dawnbreak Charger, giving itself +2/+0 until the end of turn. On my turn, I cast Guild Summit, tapping 6 gates to draw 6 cards. I also play a Gruul Guildgate, drawing me another card with the Guild Summit. After that, I cast Knight of New Alara, giving my multicolored creatures +1/+1 for each of their colors, recast Othelm, and then finally cast Yawgmoth's Vile Offering, destroying Jason's Intrepid Adversary and returning Rien from my graveyard to the battlefield. On Jason's turn, he casts Makindi Stampede, giving all his creatures +2/+2 until the end of turn. This allows him to attack me with 6 creatures and Mikayla with 2. I'm unable to block enough damage to survive, still taking 12, and Mikayla, figuring there's no real way for her to get out of this situation, opts not to block, taking 12 damage, knocking us both out, and winning Jason the game. Alright, so those were both a couple of sweet games. Obviously, the first one didn't quite go our way. It was nice to see that in the first game we got a lot more of our gate synergies, and in the second game we got a lot more of our legendary synergies. But the first game, really Bilal had us under lock for quite a while. He was able to keep control of the board very efficiently, and we weren't really able to punch through some of his defenses, meaning that the Tyranids and the vehicles kind of kept swinging other ways. I was hoping at the end of the game that I would be able to destroy Karn so that Bilal would get attacked by the vehicles, but unfortunately that wound up killing me instead. So not quite what I was hoping to have happen, but still a very good showing by our deck. I think that Shawn also had a pretty good showing, being able to get a ton of vehicles down and keep swinging with all of his angels. I think that if he'd had a little bit longer to build up his forces, or if the Karn hadn't come down when it did, he probably could have done a lot better, but maybe next time for Greasefang. Once again, Jason's Tyranid deck did quite a bit of work. it's always impressive to see unmodified precons putting in work against constructed decks. So very cool to see that from Jason. And then, of course, Bilal's Alayla deck did exactly what Alayla wanted to do. And I think the big thing that helped very early on was the Divining Top, being able to continuously bounce it and replay it to get fairies for Alayla, and then also make sure that he can protect it and always have an artifact just in case he needed it. Really helped him out in the long run. So game number 1, definitely a good win by Bilal. Game number 2, a very different game, but still won by a very similar color combination, Azorius instead of Esper. Jason's deck really put in a lot of work. I was very impressed with Raph. I didn't expect it to be that powerful, but it was super cool to see him making a ton of tokens and like tapping and untapping with Halo Fountain and with Raph and a bunch of other stuff. So a very sweet, sweet deck. I'm very interested in that deck, and I might look into building it myself, but very cool showing. Sorceress, as always, an amazing showing with Omnath. Swinging for like 50 plus damage with just 2 creatures is absolutely wild in a game of Commander. And if she had found some way to give Omnath trample, she would have started knocking people out of the game left and right. So very thankful that she wasn't able to find trample, but definitely a good showing nonetheless. Mikayla's Emil deck unfortunately didn't get to do too much. She got stuck on lands, only had 4 lands for the vast majority of the game, so she was only playing 1 unicorn a turn and not really interacting too much. So definitely a shame. Hopefully she gets the chance to show the deck off in the future. And then, of course, our deck this time less on the gate synergies, but more on the legendary synergies, being able to rebuy some of our creatures and being able to use Rien and Yawgmoth's Vile Offering to keep getting stuff out of the graveyard and being able to pump up our creatures. It was super cool to see all of the different synergies of giving all our multicolored creatures +1/+1 or giving them +1/+1 for each other legendary we control. So I think the deck worked very well. We just couldn't quite maintain enough momentum to keep going. I do think that if the Child of Alara had died rather than been exiled, we might have had a better chance, but that wasn't quite in the cards. So very cool games. Very happy that this is how we had episode 100. I think the games were great. I'm glad that we had 6 different people. Nobody showed up twice, so we got to share the love a little bit. But please let me know what you all think. Let me know if there's any cards that you would add to this deck or take out of this deck. And as always, please let me know if there's any suggestions for cards you would like to see turned into decks in the future. I love reading all of the comments and taking a look at the suggested cards because I just love building these decks. That's the most fun part of this to me. So thank you all again. I know I keep saying it, but thank you for the 100 episodes. Thank you for all of your support. And I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.